Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and the 1.6 test server just went live yesterday, and lo and behold, it has brought a whole tech tree of British light tanks. In today's video, as you might have seen in the title, I'm going to let you know why at the moment they're pretty much irrelevant in the game, they're not worth getting. I'm going to show you exactly why I feel that way, and hopefully give some suggestions as to why and how Wargaming might be able to change these vehicles. So as I've been saying for a couple of weeks now, since Tankfest, where Wargaming revealed the new British light tanks, if you haven't done so already, uncheck accelerated crew training in your Cromwell. You've got to save up just over 60,000 experience to be able to get the setter on day one when the 1.6 is released on the live server. So Wargaming have been talking about the British light tanks as if they're the next best thing in World of Tanks, as any company would do when they're about to release a new product, or in this case, new content for their game. They say the vehicles have good view range, excellent dynamics, whatever excellent dynamics means, and a high concealment rate. And they have guns with big alpha damage but mediocre DPM, suggesting that apparently the British light tanks are going to be very good scouts. Okay, well, you know what, that's all very well to talk about like that, but I think the best way to actually see if they're going to be able to fight effectively on the battlefield is to look at their statistics and to compare them to vehicles at their tiers. And thankfully, the always awesome tanks.gg website has already got the statistics taken from the test server and uploaded to the website, so we can easily compare them both visually and really dig into the statistics. So immediately, let's take a look at the setter at tier 7 and see how it stacks up to a tier 7 American light tank like the T-71 CMCD. So right off the bat, we see that the damage per minute of the setter is 1,350. Goodness gracious, that is absolutely abysmal. And just to clarify how abysmal this is, the setter has the worst damage per minute of any tier 7 light tank, medium tank, heavy tank, and of course tank destroyer. So this vehicle has the worst damage per minute at tier 7, bar none. So okay, according to Wargaming, this vehicle is going to have some really good big alpha damage to make up for this mediocre DPM, right? Well, yeah, no, not at all. This tank 75mm does 135 damage, meaning that it actually has the worst alpha damage of any of the tier 7 light tanks as well. Okay, well maybe its other statistics are going to be great, right? Maybe the shell velocity. No, it's got worse shell velocity than the T-71. Aim time, well, just a tiny little bit better than the T-71 at 0.1. Before we jump onto the gun handling though, I've got to mention that this vehicle only carries 35 rounds of ammunition, giving you a potential damage of 4,725. I don't know about you guys, but with the penetration that this vehicle has of 180, which is by no means terrible, but also not incredible, you're going to be bouncing a lot of shots when you meet tier 9 tanks. And so if you bounce half your shots, for example, you're only going to be dealing less than 2,500 damage in a game. That is not often enough to be able to carry in your tier 7 vehicles in those really close quarters fights. Or shall I say, those really close run games. The accuracy of this vehicle at 0.38, well, it's not terrible, it's definitely not great. The vehicle has worse gun dispersion values than the T-71, has worse elevation than the T-71. Alright, now onto mobility. Maybe this is where the set is going to shine. It's slower forwards, it's slower backwards, it's got an okay power to weight ratio, but it's got worse ground resistances, which means it actually kind of turns a bit like a bathtub, to be honest, with terrible traverse speeds. Alright, maybe armor. Maybe this is where the set is going to be great. Not really. I mean, 40mm on the turret is not terrible, but 40mm, you're never going to really try and make that work. Alright, what else did Wargaming say? They said that they've got good view range. Okay, good view range. Yeah, 370 is not good, is it? Unless you have a fully pimped out crew, you're not going to be using coated optics with a vehicle like this. You're going to be using binoculars. Whereas its competition at tier 7 with 390 meters view range easily will be able to get up to a very decent amount, even with coated optics, even with a poor skilled crew. This tank is just flat out worse in every single way compared to something like a T-71. And while we can see that the vehicle size is significantly smaller than the T-71, it's still not going to be the hardest thing to be able to hit with that large profile. Now, the base camera rating that this vehicle has is 20, which undoubtedly is better than the T-71, but not really by that much. With its camera rating being 25% better, I don't know about you guys, but that's really not going to make up for just how trash this vehicle is with regards to its statistics. Wargaming have told you that this tech tree is going to have good view range, good concealment, and big alpha damage. Well, I can tell you that the concealment of this vehicle, well, it's not terrible. It's not anything to write home about. It has bad view range, and it has terrible alpha and terrible DPM. This is an absolute awful tank. I'd say it's the worst tank at tier 7, and it's the one that all of you are going to be getting after you grind through the Cromwell, which probably is one of the best tier 6 tanks you can possibly play. This is going to be a horrific tank if it stays how it is on the test server and then makes it to release like this. God forbid. Alright, so, well, early days for the tech tree anyway. Does tier 7 even really matter? Why don't we jump up to tier 8 and see how the LHMTV is going to compare? Well, firstly, I'd like to say that I like the model of this vehicle. I like the oscillating turret. Yeah, it does look really cool. I think this is a cool looking tank. But while it might look good, that doesn't mean anything if its statistics aren't good, right? Let's see how it compares to the tier 8 standard German light tank, the HWK-12. So immediately we see 1,380 damage per minute. Again, ladies and gents, this has the worst damage per minute at tier 8. Absolutely abysmal. It's so bad that you're just really not going to ever be able to keep your opponents tracked, which is probably one of the most important things that a light tank is able to do. On the other hand, this vehicle does have very impressive penetration with its 83mm main armament, and that is because this is the same gun that's on the Centurion. It's just they've destroyed the rate of fire so much that they've taken the Centurion's bad damage per minute and made it pretty much unusable. So 230 alpha damage is not bad for tier 8, but again, the HWK-12, a vehicle which nobody is really ever going to want to pick, especially if you have a premium tank at tier 8, has 240, which outclasses the British light tank, which is meant to have big alpha damage. Well, so far that's not the case, right? One thing that is nice about this vehicle, however, is the shell velocity. 1,020, and you can load APCR in this tank, which has 1,275, absolutely outclasses the HWK. But that is one of the worst things about the tier 8 German light tank, so we can't really give too much credit to the LHMTV for outperforming the German vehicle in this case. Alright, so this tank, again, it can carry 25 rounds of ammunition. It can deal 5,750 potential damage on average. That's just not enough. You are going to run out of ammunition if you manage to ever fire that amount of ammunition, thinking about it with the terrible rate of fire that this vehicle has. The German tank carries twice as many rounds as this and has higher alpha damage. Okay. All right. So far, really bad news for the LHMTV. Let's move on to the gun handling. Is it going to be good news? Well, no. It's got worse aim time, worse accuracy, worse dispersion values. Not good news here. Gun depression, however, is great at 10 degrees. I like that. I like that a lot. Moving on to mobility. 63 kilometers an hour forwards. There are some medium tanks at tier 8 that are starting to kind of pack that top speed limit. Way worse, well, slightly worse, I should say, than the HWK-12, which is packing 65 kilometers an hour. Now, this vehicle weighs less than 5 tons, and so if you're expecting an insane power-to-weight ratio, well, that's not the case either. 31, while it's not terrible, it's definitely not great, and so the HWK is far faster. Even though this vehicle has better ground resistances, the traverse speeds of this tank, taking into account the worst power-to-weight ratio, means the HWK is going to feel like a racing car compared to this tank. Okay, well, maybe the armor will make up for it. Well, again, it's not terrible news with apparently 30mm of armor at the front and 60mm on the turret, although it's so flat that everything is still going to penetrate it. It's, I just don't know. Can I keep a straight face through this? Okay, come on, keep it together. All right, we'll get there, and then maybe you can all make your mind up about this line. Okay, so view range, 380. It's 30 meters worse than the HWK-12. Again, I just don't understand why Wargaming is saying that they have good view range and big alpha. They don't. They don't have good view range. They've got way worse view range than other vehicles at its tier. They don't have great alpha. They've got lower alpha damage than vehicles as well. Okay, so maybe the concealment on this vehicle is incredible. Well, its base concealment is 22.49. That's very nice. The HWK-12, for example, has a base concealment of 19.64. But let's be honest, is it really worth sacrificing all of the statistics of the vehicle to only gain a 10% increase in your concealment? Well, certainly not in my opinion. And I have no idea how a vehicle like this in size only has 10% better concealment than a vehicle that is this junky. I just don't get it. All right, well, tier 7 and tier 8, in my opinion, so far the worst tanks tier for tier in the game. Well, shall I say worst at their tier, respectively. Let's move on to tier 9. Maybe this is where the British light tanks are going to become incredible with the GSAW 3301 AVRFS. Again, I like the look of this tank. I think it looks cool. Wargaming have done a really good job with the models. It's just a shame that everything about this vehicle is really terrible, but let me just show you what I mean. All right, so immediately, G-Saw, worst damage per minute in the game at tier 9, 1,515.79. This is a tier where you're mostly going to be meeting, obviously, tier 9 and tier 10 tanks. Tier 9 and tier 10 tanks have up to 3,000 hit points. What are you going to just ask the mouse to just sit there for 2 minutes so that you can manage to shut him down? That's not usually going to work out. A T-49, a tier 9 American light tank, has 2,400 DPM. How does this make sense? How can the T-49 have 900 damage per minute more than the G-Saw? Okay, well, look, let's get back to the base of it. Wargaming have said these have got good view range and they've got big alpha. So surely that means that the G-Saw is going to have big alpha. No, it doesn't. It's got 240. Awful. The same as the T-49, but your rate of fire is so abysmal it just isn't going to work. Now, the penetration on this tank is nice. It's 20 meters, or should I say millimeters more, 20 millimeters more penetration. But again, if you load the gold and you have 254, the T-49 can do the same thing. But of course, heat rounds don't lose any penetration over distance. So I'd far rather have the heat than the APCR rounds, which are losing 33 millimeters of penetration if you're shooting at 500 meters range. Okay, let's move on to gun handling. And this is where the G-Saw actually kind of trades blows with the T-49. It has the better aim time, significantly better aim time. It has the better accuracy, but way worse dispersion values mean that this aim time advantage will definitely be cancelled out if you use any kind of mobility that the vehicle has. Now, the tank has got really nice gun elevation. That's lovely, and 10 degrees of gun depression do make this thing feel fairly flexible. All right, let's move on to mobility. 65 forwards, 25 backwards, and a 37 power to weight with slightly worse ground resistances. I mean, these vehicles are pretty much identical when it comes to mobility. All right, armor. So 70 millimeters of turret armor. Definitely not bad, but again, not ever really going to work against the large caliber guns that you're going to be meeting at tier 9 and tier 10. The vehicle has less hit points and, oh, just wait for it, 20 meters less view range. No so far. The only thing that they're right about is the DPM. They don't have big alpha. They don't have good view range. The concealment rate, I guess they're not terrible with regards to concealment rate. Let's try and create a fair test here against the American T-49. Let's put our crew out to the T-49 as well. So the T-49, which is quite a chunky light tank, has 18.27 base camo, whereas the G-Saw has 21.75. So pretty much, what, about 10-15% extra camo? How does a tank that is this chunky compared to this? How does this tank only have 15% better camo than this tank? And when we compare it to the Panhard EBR-90, for example, this thing has 24.43% camo, which just absolutely smashes the British tank out the water. Even though, once again, look, the G-Saw is actually smaller than the EBR-90 in practically every single way. How do the British light tanks not have as good concealment as other vehicles which are larger than them in World of Tanks? And the G-Saw completes the trilogy, in my opinion. The tier 7's the weakest tier 7 tank in the game. The tier 8's the weakest tier 8 tank in the game. The tier 9 is the weakest tier 9 tank in the game. All right, let's move up to tier 10. Let's check out the Manticore. If everything's good at tier 10, then everything can be forgiven, right? Maybe Wargaming are going to make good on their promise to give this vehicle high alpha damage. Well, let's see. So I want to compare the Manticore that we have on the left to the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen, which a vehicle that I'd like to highlight is the worst tier 10 tank in the game. It has a sub 47% win ratio. The win ratio on the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen is so bad that on the whatlife.com website, it's the only vehicle that actually goes into the red. It's got nearly 1.5% worse win ratio than the next least terrible tank, the WZ-113G. And so I think you can all figure out why I'm trying to compare the Manticore to the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen here. Okay, so first off, 1,671 damage per minute, making the Manticore the lowest damage per minute tank in the game at tier 10, significantly worse than even the EBR-105. Now, while the Manticore does have okay standard penetration of 248, as soon as you load the gold with this tank, your penetration only increases by 20 millimeters, whereas all of the other tier 8 light tanks, apart from the French wheeled light tank, the penetration goes up to 280, and it's high explosive anti-tank. which means that high explosive anti-tank will not lose any penetration over distance, while the Manticore's premium rounds are dropping down to 226 millimeters of penetration at 500 meters, which means that you're not really going to be doing very well against well-armored tier 9 and tier 10 tanks, unlike some of the other tier 10 light tanks can. Okay, now onto the alpha damage, and the Manticore uses a 105mm gun. It has 390 alpha damage. Okay, boys and girls, that is the super special guns with big alpha damage. It's actually hilarious. Lower alpha damage at tier 7, lower alpha damage at tier 8, lower alpha damage at tier 9, and just joint top alpha damage at tier 10, along with vehicles like the Sheridan, the WZ-1321, or even the AMX-13-105, which has an autoloader, or the EBR-105, which has 390 alpha damage. So I was thinking to myself, well, maybe the Manticore is going to get really good high explosive rounds. No, that's not the case either. This thing doesn't even get special HESH rounds, 480 alpha damage and 60 millimeters of penetration. I'll tell you what, there's a certain French wheeled light tank called the EBR-105, which is going to just absolutely laugh at the Manticore when it gets going with its high explosive rounds. Now this leads me on to possibly my biggest problem with this tank, ladies and gents, and that is that it can carry 16 rounds of ammunition. I know when I said this at Tank Fest, I thought, well, they're going to give it really high alpha or something, right? No, it can carry 16 rounds of ammunition. That means that this vehicle, if it penetrates all of its shots for average damage, is going to deal 6,000 damage. I don't know about you guys, but if you bounce half your shells or they miss, then you're only going to be dealing 3,000 damage. That is not enough to carry quite a few of your tier 10 games. Another thing that's incredibly frustrating about only carrying 6 rounds of ammunition is that how are you going to afford to take any high explosive rounds? Or how are you going to balance out your AP and your APCR rounds for when you're in your good matchups or when you're in your tier 10 matchups? Are you just going to take full APCR and just lose credits every single game that you play this tank and feel that you're making yourself significantly worse by not taking the APCR rounds? A bit like on the old FV215B183, for example. Anyway, it's abysmal, but I'll be following it up when I fully review the Manticore, probably in a video on Sunday where I'll be showing you some gameplay of the vehicle. Alright, so we found out that this vehicle pretty much has a worse gun in my opinion than the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen, the weakest tier 10 tank in the game. So let's move on to gun handling. Its aim time is really not very good at 2.3 seconds. Its accuracy is bad at 0.38 seconds. It has bad dispersion values when it's moving. Its turret burst dispersion is okay. And this vehicle has awful gun elevation at 8 degrees. And okay gun depression, but definitely not great gun depression at 8 degrees. It's just, oh man. Okay, keep it together, keep it together, keep it together. Remain balanced. Alright, okay. Now onto mobility. Maybe this is where the Manticore is going to shine. 68 forwards, slower than the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen. Power to weight ratio, just over 40. That's very good. But it's slower than the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen. Its ground resistances are worse on everything apart from soft, which means that this vehicle has better traverse on soft but worse on medium and hard. Well, maybe the armor of this vehicle is where it's going to make up. And while it does have 80mm of turret armor, I can tell you, you're not bouncing very consistently. While it is angled in this part, most of the shells are either going to hit your hull and they're going to overmatch it, or they're going to hit this part of your vehicle. And while the tank is definitely low profile, it does have a big side shot. And as this vehicle is not driving as fast as the EBR and wiggling all over the place, it's not the hardest thing to be able to hit. It also has less hit points than the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen, and good view range. I mean, 400 meters isn't bad, considering the T100LT has 390 meters view range. But it's not good, is it, when the Rheinmetall has 420? What that means is that you're almost certainly going to have to take coated optics on this vehicle and not drop coated optics, unlike something like the Sheridan or the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen, which you can probably make do with dropping coated optics if you want to play a more offensive light tank role. And so, ladies and gents, boys and girls, in my opinion, the Manticore is the worst tier 10 tank in the game as it stands. And considering that clearly the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen is better than it in almost every single way, how in good God's name is it not going to drop to a global average win ratio of sub 45%? I played this thing for a couple of hours on the test server and I had to absolutely try my heart out to achieve even a reasonable light tank game. And as if this wasn't enough, one thing that I forgot to mention just sitting in this garage is to say that this tank only has 2 crew members. And so that puts an insane amount of pressure on your commander. Your commander, even having 6 crew skill slots, is still going to be missing important things like Call for Vengeance, Snapshot, Designated Target, even repairs on this vehicle. And while it didn't happen to me on the test server, I expect when a lot of people are playing artillery and splashing these things, multiple crew deaths, meaning that you have no more crew members to be able to operate the tank and then it ceases to function, is going to happen frequently. A passing mention should be made, however, to the concealment rating of this vehicle. And the base concealment rating, when you have it fully tricked out, is 23.52%. Now that's awesome, but let's take a look to see what the concealment rating of the EBR 105 is, for example. 24.15%. And this is what just really confuses me. Let's take a look at the profile of the Manticore and compare it to the EBR 105. Look how much taller the EBR is, yet the EBR has better camo rating than the Manticore has. Look at it. How can a tank that is so tall and so much bigger have better concealment rating than the Manticore does? And if you're used to your T100 LT's camo rating of 22.84, well, look, the Manticore isn't even that much better. A 0.5% extra camo, that's not going to make up for all of the disadvantages that this tank has. And so with all due respect, Wargaming, I'm completely bewildered at the way that you have described these British light tanks, because they do not live up to anything that you have stated they will. I would go as far as to say that have you made a mistake here? Is this a mistake that you've literally put these vehicles in with the statistics that they have? Do you understand how disappointing this is for players who have been looking forward to British light tanks going into the game since the Brits were first released in 8.0 update? I honestly think that Wargaming have no idea what these British light tanks are meant to do in World of Tanks. They don't have the best camo. They don't have the best alpha damage. They don't have the best anything. And in fact, the vehicles have so many drawbacks that will make your life a living hell in the game that I would go as far as to say that these vehicles are not only irrelevant, they're useless in the game right now. And I'd like to question just what Wargaming were thinking with this British light tank tech tree. If you want to make them the best scouts in the game, then they need to have more concealment than the French-wheeled vehicles. What are you trying to do with them? Are you trying to make them counterpunchers? If so, where's their alpha damage? Why does this vehicle, when it only carries 16 rounds of ammunition, not have something like 600 alpha damage? Why not only give it HESH rounds so it can only target lightly armored tanks or have to sneak in and get behind something to be able to assassinate it, for example? If you didn't want to make them the big alpha damage punchers that you said that you wanted to, why not make them the best scouts? Why not give them the best camo rating? They don't. The EBR has the best camo rating even though it's the larger vehicle. Why not make them fast? Why not give them good view range to enable them to do that? Let them have the worst gun on any of tier 10 tank in the game with an abysmal crew and ammo loadout, but at least allow them to become the monster scout. Make them faster while giving them better view range and camo rating, and then possibly you might actually make these tanks remotely useful. But at least, as of now, ladies and gentlemen, not all is lost. Wargaming have made some really good looking models in my opinion. They've given them all names and it does feel like the vehicles kind of grow in their look. And also, remember, this is the first iteration of the test server, and maybe Wargaming are just putting these vehicles in as by far the statistically weakest tanks in the game to then tune them up as a strategy rather than introduce them and then as they think they should go into the test server and then tune them down or tune them up just a little bit. Maybe it's a plan. And my feedback for all of the devs that if this isn't your plan to put them in statistically weaker than you're planning to put them in the game, please readdress all of it. Otherwise you have literally wasted your complete development time with these vehicles and given them no purpose in World of Tanks. They're not the best scouts. They're not the best damage dealers. It's a tree of practically useless tanks that if you decide to play, because I guess you're a masochist, that you're going to be putting yourself and your team at a disadvantage. But, I don't know. Maybe you all think I'm wrong. YouTube, let me know. Do you agree with me? Do you think the statistics of all of these vehicles look absolutely tragic? Or do you think they look like they might have some kind of a purpose? And how would you change the British light tanks to make them relevant in the game? Anyway, that's it for today, ladies and gents. Hopefully you enjoyed this one. If you did, give the video a thumbs up, but if you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And stay tuned to the channel as I'll be releasing more videos on specifically the Manticore and the state that it's in, and also about the 1.6 update in the channel very soon. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.